Hello, my name is Stacy Couch, and my website is wildgratitude.com. I am here to share with you the wisdom of the story of the little Brier rose. First, I'll share the story with you, and then I'll talk about how this story speaks to the cycles of creativity in the soul, how creativity in us falls asleep, and how it must incubate and gestate for a time and then be woken up. This story, Little Brier Rose, is a version of a story many of you are probably familiar with, which is Sleeping Beauty. All right, let us begin. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen that wanted very much to have a child, but they were unable. Then, one day, the queen was in her bath and a frog hopped in. In some stories, it's a crab that scampers in. And the frog tells the queen the good news. You have a child on the way. This child will be a little girl. The queen was delighted, so was the king. And even more delighted was the couple and everyone in the kingdom when 9 months later came a beautiful, happy little girl. They named the little girl Brier Rose and planned a great celebration and invited everyone across the whole kingdom, cooked lots of lavish food, made a big production out of celebrating their new baby girl. And of course, at any party, namesake day, christening of a new child, you must invite the fairy godmother, at least a fairy godmother, but of course the king and queen invited every one of them across the kingdom. Well, almost every one of them. They had 12 golden plates and there were 13 fairies. So they thought, I guess we only invite 12 of them, which is what they did. So the party came, everyone was celebrating and feasting, and then the moment arrived when it was time for each of the fairy godmothers to stand up and bless the baby girl with good tidings. The first stood up and blessed the baby girl with virtue. The second got up and blessed the baby girl with beauty. The third got up and blessed the baby girl with good health. The fourth, good life, and so on and so forth until they got to the 11th. And just as the 11th fairy godmother finished offering her beautiful blessing for the little girl, the doors burst open in the hall, and in came the 13th fairy godmother with very angry look on her face. She was very disgruntled, very unhappy about not having been invited. And promptly she yelled to everyone in the hall, "Well, because you decided not to invite me, I curse your little girl to die by the prick of a spindle on her 15th birthday." Ugh, in a huff, she turned, slammed the door behind herself, and left. Everyone gasped. No, it can't be true. We can't lose her in 15 years and even know it's coming. Oh, that's even worse. But luckily, there was one fairy godmother remaining. She stood up and announced, "Well, I can't undo what's just been done, but with my wish and blessing for the little girl, I can alter it. So on her 15th birthday, little Brier Rose will prick her finger with a spindle and fall fast asleep and have a long and deep sleep." Well, this was better, but still not great. The party promptly ended, and the king and queen decided that what they would do was ban all spindles in the kingdom. The king ordered that every one of them that was currently in existence be destroyed, be burned in a great big huge fire. And so that happened. And little Brier Rose passed on in the years grew into this happy, joyful, intelligent, radiant little girl that made every room light up that she walked into. Her parents were, of course, madly in love with her, but so was everyone in the kingdom. And then her 15th birthday came. By then, they'd forgotten about the curse, dismissed it from their minds. And little Brier Rose found herself alone for part of the day. Her parents were off, I don't know what they were doing, planning this party, I don't know. But they had left little Brier Rose by herself. So she started to wander the castle in boredom, wondering, what can I find? What's new here today? And she eventually came to an old tower that she'd never been in. She followed the spiral staircase up to the top and encountered a single door with a golden key in the lock. She turned the key and the door swings open. And inside is an old woman sitting, spinning flax with a spindle. The old woman's very friendly, and little Brier Rose and her spark up conversation. Little Brier Rose is intrigued by this spinning process and the flax. She's never seen anything like it before. She asked the old woman if she could try her hand at it. And the old woman hands it over. And as little Brier Rose was fumbling around trying to figure out how to make this all work, she accidentally pricked her finger with the tip of that spindle. She fell promptly asleep. The thing is that so did everybody else in the castle. Everybody in the castle fell asleep. The king and queen, the stable hands out in the stable mucking the stalls, the horses, the sheep, the goats, the pigeons tucked their heads under their wings and fell fast asleep. Even the flies on the wall fell asleep. The fires in the hearths fell asleep themselves, simmering down. The roast spinning on the spit stopped sizzling. Everything in the castle went to sleep. And magically up around the castle grew this thick hedge of thorns. And it was so thick and so massive that in a short amount of time, this hedge of thorns covered the entire castle. So you wouldn't even know that there's a castle there. But legend spread throughout the land of what had happened. And over the years, different princes came to try and save the princess Brier Rose and asleep in the castle, but none of them could make it through the thorny hedge. Soon the story, the legend of the sleeping princess was passed down from generation to generation, because now it's been decades, and soon it becomes 100 years. Until one prince who's passing by, who's heard the legend and recognizes the place that he's come across, decides he'll try his turn at passing through the thorny hedge and saving the princess. And as he approaches the hedge, it bursts into blossom, roses, red roses everywhere, all over the entire huge thorny hedge. And as he walks closer and closer, the hedge opens up in front of him and grants him passage through. He walks in, sees the castle's attendants asleep in the yard, the goats asleep in their pasture. He can't hear a fly. There's not a bird singing. Even the birds are asleep. And he wanders through the castle. He sees the king and queen are asleep. Everyone's asleep until he comes finally to this tower and goes up the spiral staircase. He gets to the top and walks into the room and sees the beautiful Brier Rose laying on the floor with a spindle in her hand. He walks up, takes the spindle out of her hand, and Brier Rose promptly wakes up. Once she is awake, the whole castle comes alive. The thorny hedge retreats, the king and queen wake up, the flies start buzzing around, the roast starts sizzling on the spit, the fire blaze up in the hearths, the attendants wake up and start mucking in the stalls again, and the horses begin whinnying and frolicking about. Little Brier Rose and the prince then married, and as all these stories go, then lived happily ever after. So how is this a story about creativity, you ask? It seems like a story about not doing much of anything for 100 years, right? Well, it starts with this initial piece of the king and the queen wanting to have a child. That is a metaphor for wanting to create, right? When we have a creative project, we call it our baby. So that is the creative impulse from the get-go, the very first line of the story. And then we have the spindle arriving, and the spindle is absolutely a metaphor for work and creativity. You're taking raw material, raw flax, raw wool, and you're spinning it into a thread, which then can be woven into some sort of fabric or tapestry. So a spindle very much is related to the creative process, but it also can be related to work, to monotonous work. So one way of viewing this story is viewing it as the time in our lives when we enter into adulthood and we are bitten by the work bug, where we're, okay, I've got to go, I've got to create, got to be productive in society. You need to go out there and make a living and do something productive. And we get bitten with that work bug, and we get spinning in a circle where we're not going anywhere. We're just day after day, that daily grind of going to work, but we're not really accomplishing anything or getting anywhere. We kind of fall asleep to our authentic and our creative selves. That's one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding it is that when we are presented with an opportunity to create, here's the old woman presenting little Brier Rose with the spindle and the flax, we become afraid of failure and what might happen. And so we become the avoidant artist, and we spin around in our thoughts without ever really creating anything. So you see, there's a couple different ways to work with this story, and I've written an extensive article detailing how to work through these different metaphors and this idea of losing access to the creative self, of falling asleep to the creative life. And then from there, we have this deep sleep. No matter how much we try to avoid it, even if we know that it's a possibility that we may fall asleep to our creative selves, we may lose touch with our creativity, we still somehow are unable to prevent it. That tells us that there's something necessary here to this deep sleep. Absolutely. This deep sleep shows up in a lot of different myths and stories. The deep sleep is a time of incubation. It's when that creative self, creative idea rests and grows in the womb, in the darkness, in the quiet, away from the world. It's a necessary stage of the creative process. So rather than always seeing that deep sleep as going unconscious, which is one way to look at it and work with it, we can also see it as a soulful time where we delve into our interior and our inner lives, and we work and grow, and nobody out there sees what's going on. We're protected by that thorny hedge. And then there is the right timing. 100 years is a common cycle or time in these stories. And it's a metaphor for divine timing. How many times have you had a project that you've tried to launch only to find it fall flat on its face because it's just not the right time for it. That's what the wisdom of this story is telling us, that the coming out, the opening up, the blossoming of a creative project or creative selves is also dependent on right timing. And then in the end, the roses, the love. I see this not as romantic love, but as self-love, as divine love, as coming into the stage and the space of love. Because when we're able to love and appreciate our own creativity, we then have the courage to release it from our interior, to share it with the world. So, like I said, I've written an article about this. I've done a whole mini class on this story and how it gives us wisdom from the soul on the creative life and waking up our creativity. So I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. I would love for you to read it and share your comments either here with the video or on the article on my website. I would love to hear what you have to say, and if you have questions, I'm glad to answer those too. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining me, and have a lovely day.